Welcome to Boring Tales, where we tell the most boring stories you'll ever love. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comment section below. Tonight's tale begins on the edge of the Nile as the light begins to fall. The sky was beginning to dim, not all at once, not quickly, but in the slowest way the evening knew how, with colors fading softly, one shade at a time. Amun stood on the riverbank, his sandals barely pressing into the dry, silty soil beneath his feet. He was not in a hurry. He never was, not at this time of day. The wind was gentle, just a thin, warm current that rustled the long blades of papyrus. Each stalk swayed not in rhythm, but in slow disagreement with the others. Overhead, the clouds were few, long and thin, like pulled cotton that had been teased apart. They drifted across the dulling blue, slowly fading into dusky lavender, and barely there, pink. The sun, a dull orange disk now, sank low behind a cluster of distant palm trees. Its reflection stretched across the water in long trembling lines, never quite still. The Nile, wide and heavy, moved with a hush. There were no waves, only soft shifting glimmers, brown and gold, gray and mauve, all blending together like dye, soaked through old linen. The river seemed to breathe, in and out, though it never truly did. Amun watched the patterns change across its surface, slowly, very slowly. Behind him, a wooden boat waited. Long, narrow, with a simple arch in the middle, covered by a curved roof made of reed mats. It had no sail. It didn't need one. Just oars and the patience of the man who rowed it. Amun didn't speak. He never spoke during this time, not even to himself. He only watched the light change. It was always the same light, yet always slightly different. Some evenings were more gold, some more gray. Tonight it was mostly gray. He listened. To the creak of nearby trees, to the whistle of a bird calling out just once, and then falling silent again. He listened to the grasshoppers, already beginning their soft, endless chirp, like a sound that had always been there. A single water bird, perhaps a heron, moved across the far shore, its legs so thin they looked like lines drawn with a dull reed pen. It stepped once, waited, stepped again, and disappeared behind a low bush. The scent of the evening was dry, dust, clay, something faintly metallic. The smell of the Nile itself, not clean, but old, not sharp, but steady, familiar. Amun's shoulders were relaxed, his arms loose at his sides. He looked at the sky again, where one thin ribbon of pink had now turned to pale gray. The sun was just above the trees. Not bright, just low. It would soon be gone. Not in a sudden way, not like a lamp being snuffed, but gradually. So gradually, you almost wouldn't notice unless you stood still and watched, like Amun did every night. He shifted his feet slightly in the dust, one heel turning slowly, the way someone might turn a pebble between their fingers. He breathed in, then out. There was no need to move yet. His boat would wait, the river would wait, the dark would come on its own time. Amun let his eyes fall once more to the surface of the water. There was nothing there to see, and yet he kept watching. The day had not ended, not quite. It was only beginning to settle. The boat did not move. It rested on the edge of the river, held in place by a single loop of rope, wrapped around a smooth round stone driven deep into the bank. The rope, old and fraying, had been tied with the same knot for years, a knot Amun learned from his father, and had never once needed to change. Its wood was dark from years of sun and silt, not polished, not new, but worn in the way of something used with quiet, patient care, Not a single board gleamed. Nothing about it shone. It was the kind of boat that blended into the water, became part of the river itself. Its surface smelled of earth and dust and faint, dried fish. Its scent did not change, not even after rain. Amun stepped closer, slowly, his footfalls making the faintest sound in the powdery sand, like cloth brushing against cloth. He reached out a hand, fingers touching the top edge of the boat, where the wood curved gently, worn smooth by years of touch. His thumb paused at a dent, a small impression from long ago, when a heavy jar had been dropped during loading. The jar had broken, the dent had stayed. He ran his palm over the seat plank, flat, wide, slightly bowed in the center. The grain of the wood was visible in the fading light, rings and lines that had once belonged to a tree now long forgotten. Beneath that plank, the faint scent of dried reeds rose up, mixed with time and silence. The oars rested inside the boat, two of them, identical in shape, different in wear. One was slightly heavier, its handle smooth from more frequent use. The other had a faint chip at the blade's edge, not enough to matter, but just enough to notice. Amun picked one up. Slowly. He always did it this way. No rush, no sound. His hand closed over the handle. The curve fit perfectly into his grip. Not tight, not loose, just right. He tested the balance, held the oar upright, let its weight settle against his arm, then laid it across the seat with care, not to place it down too quickly, not to let it make a sound. His fingers brushed the side of the boat. The wooden slats were held together by fiber cords, each one still strong. Some had darkened with time, some had frayed slightly, but none had broken. He checked each with the tip of his finger, the way he always did. Then he crouched. Slowly, letting his knees bend in time with the earth, settling into the space where he stored the small things. The jar for water, the folded cloth for shade, the tiny packet of salt he always carried but never used. He touched each one in turn, making sure they were all where they should be. The boat gave a tiny creak as he shifted his weight. A quiet sound, not from weakness but from memory. The kind of sound that spoke of long hours on the water. The kind that made no announcement, only a soft acknowledgement that it still lived. He sat for a moment, just sitting, hands resting on his thighs. Eyes on the water, breath moving in and out, unnoticed. In the distance, a thin ripple crossed the Nile, caused by nothing, or perhaps something far away. It didn't matter, the ripple passed, disappeared. The sun was lower now, nearly behind the trees. The air had changed slightly, a touch cooler, but not much. Just enough to feel on the skin if you waited long enough. Amun looked at the rope again, still holding the boat, still tight. He would untie it soon. Not yet. Soon. But not yet. The rope still tied was older than many of the trees now lining the bank. Its fibers, once pale and coarse, had darkened over time. Softened too, not from weakness but from wear. The knot, Amun's knot, sat quietly beneath his fingers. He had tied it in the morning, as always, in the same pattern, pulled tight, but not strained. Amun reached down and brushed a thumb across it, slow and deliberate, like a man smoothing the spine of an old book. The strands shifted just slightly under the pressure. They did not resist, they had been waiting patiently. He did not untie it. Instead, he adjusted his position, shifted one leg, then the other, letting his feet rest deeper in the earth at the edge of the bank. The sand gave way a little, just a little, enough to settle him, enough to let his body know it could stay still a while longer. His eyes moved to the river. The Nile was wide here, though it didn't seem so from this low angle. It moved in long, flat waves, not hurried, not still, just consistent. A current too slow to notice unless you watched it for a long, long time. Which Amun often did. Out on the water, a thin reed drifted sideways, its tip just visible, spinning slowly in a lazy circle. No destination, no intention, just spinning. The sky had grown paler now, the light stretched thinner, and the clouds, what few there were, had become little more than faint brushstrokes, high, soft lines, like threads of old linen. Amun turned back to the boat, his hand resting on its rim again, not gripping it, just resting. His fingers curved gently, memorizing the shape, as they had done every evening before this one. He leaned slightly forward, not to act, not to stand, just to feel the shift in balance, to let the weight of his body know that something might happen soon. The rope tugged faintly against the stone, a whisper of tension, not enough to move the boat, but enough to speak. Amun leaned closer, and slowly, slowly, began to loosen the knot, not to untie it completely, not yet, but to test it, to let it remember movement. The outer loop slid under his fingers, the rope gave a quiet, dusty sigh. Then he paused. Let it rest. Let it hold. A breeze moved across the riverbank, barely enough to lift a grain of sand, but it stirred the edges of Amun's tunic. The fabric shifted against his skin. Soft. Familiar. He did not brush it back. Above, a bird glided across the last strip of light. Its wings didn't flap, they didn't need to. It was the kind of movement Amun watched with a still mind. There was no lesson in it, only presence. The knot was loose now, not undone, but loose. It sat like that often, in this in-between stage, no longer tightly fixed, not yet free. Amun sat back again. The silence, broken only by the smallest rhythms, the ripple of water against reed, the occasional creak of the boat settling its weight, the long, slow sigh of the river. These were the sounds that filled the evening, not noise, not music, just the shape of quiet. The sun, lower still, painted the undersides of the clouds in a gentle orange now, not bright, just enough to notice if you were already watching, which Amun was. Still, he did not untie the rope completely. He could have. But the moment had not asked for it yet. The air around him was warm, but not heavy, the kind of warmth that makes you forget it's there, until you step away and miss it. The rope, the boat, the river all waited. So did Amun. And in that waiting, there was no impatience, no plan. Just the slow passing of time. Amun stood beside his boat, his feet pressed into the soft earth of the riverbank, where wet soil clung to the soles of his worn sandals. The scent of the Nile was stronger here, mingled with reeds, and faint traces of fish and sun-warmed wood. The boat rested silently at the edge, its sides gently brushing against the lapping current, as if it were breathing. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. His hands reached down to the oars, long weathered shafts of wood smoothed by years of rowing. The grain of the wood was familiar. Each ridge, each dip, each groove from where his palms had wrapped and gripped, again and again. He ran his fingers along one oar, tracing it from end to end. The surface was neither rough, nor fully smooth, just worn in the way an old path might be, where many feet have passed and the ground has learned to yield. He lifted the oar, very slowly, pausing at each inch. Its weight was expected, not heavy, not light, but perfectly balanced. The kind of balance you notice when nothing else is rushing. He turned it gently in his hands, listening to the soft creak of the shaft as it responded to his grip. A deep breath rose in his chest. He exhaled slowly, the way the reeds sway in the wind. Unhurried, effortless. The other oar leaned against the side of the boat, partially submerged. He knelt and touched the cool water beside it, letting it drip over his fingers. Then, just as slowly, he lifted that second oar too, cradling it in his arms for a moment, as though greeting an old friend. He laid both oars gently across the boat's bench, where their ends met at a slight angle. The wood clacked softly as they touched. Then he stood again, not quickly. His knees straightened with deliberation, his back uncurled like the petals of a night-blooming flower. Amun looked at the oars once more. He would not begin rowing just yet. There was still time to listen, to breathe, to feel the night's hush settle even deeper around him. Amun moved slowly along the side of the boat, his hand trailing the length of its wooden hull, fingertips brushing over each notch, each shallow groove carved by time, by the current, by gentle collisions with reeds and riverstones. The wood was pale in places, darker in others, soaked with years of water and sun, of night dew and daytime glare. He crouched low and laid both palms flat against the edge of the boat, pausing, pressing, feeling. The boat had no voice, but it told stories in texture, in the smooth oiled center where his hands always pushed off, in the slightly raised knots where a craftsman's tool had hesitated, in a single, almost invisible crack that had never widened with age. He leaned in, resting his forearms on the wood, gazing into the small hollow where he stored his supplies. A soft cloth, faded from its original red, folded and set to cushion a seat. A small clay jar, sealed with a plug of papyrus fiber, and a shallow woven basket tucked in the corner, where a few dry dates sat waiting, wrinkled, sweet, and quietly fragrant. His hand reached for the cloth first. He unfolded it slowly, letting it drape over the narrow seat plank. He pressed it down at each corner with steady palms, not smoothing it entirely, but giving it just enough form to welcome his weight later. He did not rush. He never rushed. The cloth seemed to sigh as it settled. Next he adjusted the oars, lifting one and laying it across the rowing notch, easing it into place. It didn't snap in. It didn't resist. It merely shifted, as though remembering the angle from the day before. He checked the second oar, lining it beside the first. Both ends aligned now, both resting where they belonged. Beside the seat lay a small length of rope, frayed at the tips, rough in texture yet still strong. Amun wrapped it slowly in a figure eight, coiling it with care, folding each loop into the next, until it lay compact and ready. He tied it off with a small knot, not too tight, not too loose, just enough to hold its shape. The boat, even as it rested, seemed to welcome his touch. Every board he leaned on, every object he adjusted, yielded quietly beneath his fingertips. There were no surprises, no sudden sounds. Just the soft creak of wood, the distant call of a waterbird far across the river, and the almost inaudible sigh of a breeze weaving through the reeds. He paused again, sat on the edge, closed his eyes. And for a while, there was only the steady warmth of the wood beneath him, and the knowledge that all was nearly ready. Amun remained seated for some time, his fingers resting on his knees, his breath soft and steady, rising and falling like the slow drift of the river itself. The light had not changed much, but the quiet had deepened. Even the breeze, once moving freely through the reeds, seemed to hush, as though respectfully waiting. He turned his head slowly, eyes drifting toward the far edge of the bank. There, in the shallows, A cluster of papyrus stalks leaned inward, their long, thin shadows etched across the sand. Among them, a single water beetle moved. Tiny legs, barely disturbing the surface tension, leaving a delicate ripple in its wake. Amun watched it, unmoving, as if that tiny motion required his full attention. Then, gently, he reached for a small gourd tucked beside the basket of dates. Its surface was smooth, slightly cool, and hollow-sounding when tapped. He uncorked it carefully, not to drink, but to test. A quiet sniff, then a tilt, letting a few drops fall onto his palm. Still fresh. He nodded to himself and sealed it again. At his feet lay a slender pole, used for pushing off the shallows when the oars wouldn't catch. He lifted it slowly, inspected its end, saw the worn wrapping of linen still intact. He pressed the tip into the ground beside him, just to feel its balance. Then he laid it across the boat, beside the seat, aligned with care. He turned his gaze to the sky, just above the far trees. A few birds glided silently there, wings stretched wide, not flapping, just gliding. Effortless, familiar. He followed their path with his eyes, until they disappeared behind the low clouds. He did not blink quickly. He did not move to follow. He simply watched, then turned his attention back to the boat. Finally he stood. Not quickly, but with the kind of slow care that comes from years of repetition. He ran one hand along the side of the boat again, this time from stern to bow. He checked the planks, tapped the wooden joints. Not to find anything wrong, but to be sure, as always, that everything felt as it should. The ropes, the oars, the pole, the cloth seat, the gourd, the dates. Each item in its place. Nothing hurried, nothing extra, nothing forgotten. Amun breathed out slowly, eyes half closed, his body still, but not tense. He reached into the boat and pressed gently against the center of the floor, feeling its give, the familiar bend of aged wood, holding steady beneath his palm. Then he said nothing. He did nothing. He simply stood beside the boat, with the light gently dimming behind the reeds, and the still water ahead, waiting. The earth beneath Amun's sandals was soft, packed with silt and scattered with curled leaves from a tree that leaned far over the bank. The air around him was still, thick with the warmth of the fading day, and laced with the scent of river mud and dry reeds. He moved with deliberate slowness, his sandals lifting with a whisper, then settling again into the same worn impressions made countless evenings before. He stepped closer to the small boat, letting one hand trail across its edge, fingers brushing gently along the smoothed wood. It felt cool now, having released the heat it had gathered during the day. Amun paused again, his hand resting where the boat met the water's edge, the line between land and river, between stillness and drift. The pole lay at the ready, just where he had placed it. He stooped slowly, knees creaking slightly beneath the long linen tunic, and took the pole in hand. The end was worn, rounded by time and river stones. He held it upright for a moment, examining the grain of the wood, tracing a knot in the middle with his thumb. With a breath drawn through the nose, and let out through slightly parted lips, he moved to the rear of the boat. The river lapped gently against the side, a rhythm older than memory. Slosh pause, slosh pause. He planted the pole into the muddy bank, pressing firmly, then easing the boat forward, inch by inch. It groaned softly in response, the wooden joints murmuring as it shifted. He did not speak. He never spoke during this part. Words would only disturb the slow ceremony of the launch. He pushed again, just a little more, and the boat slid forward, riding the shallow water, its nose cutting through the lily pads without sound. The ripples spread out, then vanished. Amun stepped carefully into the boat, one foot, then the other, hands outstretched slightly for balance. The small craft rocked gently beneath him, but held steady. He crouched low, letting his weight settle slowly onto the plank seat. Everything creaked once, then stilled. He took another long breath, eyes closed, listening not for danger, but for calm. The boat floated freely now, untethered, moving only with the faint tug of current and the slow intentions of the man seated within it. Amun rested the pole beside him, its tip still damp with riverbank silt. He placed it gently along the side of the boat, the quiet click of wood on wood registering softly in the stillness. Then he folded his hands on his lap, palms upward, fingers loose. His eyes drifted to the horizon, not seeking anything in particular, just observing, just being. The river's surface reflected the low sky colors, muted and pale, streaked with dusky gold, silvery blue, and a faint rose where the light held on just a little longer. The boat drifted a few feet from the bank, not fast, never fast. It glided with the grace of a thing allowed to be what it is, a vessel following a current, shaped by time, use, and silence. The reeds along the bank rustled only slightly now. The breeze had softened, or perhaps gone still altogether. Somewhere in the distance, a frog made a gentle sound, low, round, rhythmic. Not a croak exactly, but a throatful note that rolled out into the air, then vanished. Amun adjusted his weight slightly, not because he was uncomfortable, but because that was simply what came next. His movements were never hurried. He lived by the water's pace. The wood beneath him had grown familiar to the shape of his body, molded by habit, softened by use. The grooves and dents, the spots polished by his hands and robes, all part of the quiet, enduring relationship between a man and his boat. The oars sat beside him, long, narrow, wrapped with twine at the grips. He reached for one, turned it in his hand, examined the slight split near the base. It had been there for many years. It hadn't widened. He ran a thumb along the length, feeling where the wood thinned, slightly worn down from years of rhythm. He would not lift them just yet, not until the boat had drifted far enough to let the work begin without rush. For now, he sat, eyes half closed, shoulders relaxed, the river moving beneath him, and the sound of the water lapping gently against the sides. Nothing urgent, no destination, just the ancient habit of drifting, and the patient company of the Nile. Eventually the boat came to a slower drift, the current weakening, as it curved inward around a small island of silt and reeds. Amun reached for the oars, slowly, one after the other. He placed them into the narrow openings carved into the boat's sides. The wood clicked into place, not harshly, just enough to let him know they were secure. He rested his hands on the grips, not to begin rowing yet, but to feel their weight, their presence. The oars had been carved by his father many years ago. The grain was familiar. He could trace its pattern in his mind. He had repaired them a few times, added twine where cracks formed, resanded the tips when they became too rough. With a breath as calm as the evening breeze, he dipped the left oar into the water, gently, barely disturbing the surface. Then the right, both oars resting in the river like long fingers trailing through a bowl of oil. He gave one light stroke. The boat answered, not quickly, not decisively, but in the slow way an old friend might turn toward you at the end of a long day. Another stroke, then another. The boat responded, finding its rhythm. Amun's arms moved in a practiced loop. Forward, dip, pull, lift, forward, dip, pull. The sound of the oars was soft, not a splash, but a smooth parting of water, followed by the faint trickle as it closed behind them. The sky had deepened further now. The first faint stars shimmered overhead, not twinkling sharply, but blurred slightly by the warmth still rising from the river. The horizon faded into a soft smudge of trees and mist. He rode without thought, his mind as still as the water behind him. The rhythm didn't quicken. It never did. It was not about getting anywhere. It was about being here now, in this quiet movement, this ancient ritual, this slow, dreamlike progress through water and light and time. As the boat glided forward, reeds whispered beside him, and distant birds gave out their last fading notes of the day. The oars moved, the river carried, the boat obeyed, and Amun simply rode into the deepening dusk. There was a time when Amun tried to understand the river, to listen closely, hoping its ripples and flows might tell him something. But now he didn't try. He simply heard. Not with effort, not with his ears alone, but with the whole of himself, skin, breath, bones, and memory. The water beneath the boat wasn't just moving. It was murmuring, to itself, to the stones below, to the wind that wandered lazily through the reeds. The river did not speak in words, not in warnings. It spoke in the round sound of currents meeting driftwood, in the hush of water curling around the boat's hull, in the tiniest splash of a fish too small to be seen, disturbing the surface only briefly, then gone again. Amun sat still, his hands resting loosely on the oars, which had gone quiet for now. He was not rowing, not yet. He was letting the boat drift sideways toward a deeper current, letting the water choose, as he had done countless times before. The soft sounds rose all around him. A tiny insect buzzed near his ear, then lifted upward, spiraling lazily toward a frond of papyrus. Somewhere upstream he could hear the faint chitter of riverbirds settling into nests tucked into reeds. Their wings rustled like parchment as they folded them. Nothing abrupt, nothing sharp, only the sounds of things finishing their day, like he was. Every sound had its place. The distant splash of a crocodile's tail, the soft click of water touching stone, the creak of the boat shifting just slightly under him, the faint breath of wind catching his linen tunic and letting it settle again against his chest. It was music, not the kind that begged for attention, but the kind that unfolded itself, only if one remained still enough, long enough to truly hear. And so Amun listened. For long minutes, maybe longer. He did not count the time. Time meant little here. He simply let the river speak, and let silence be part of the song. As the boat drifted closer to the reed beds, the sounds changed again. The reeds were tall, some swaying with thin stalks that curved just slightly under their own weight, others standing firm, their green blades cutting quietly through the warm dusk air. Amun recognized this part of the river well. He knew where the roots tangled deepest, where turtles sometimes poked their heads up, where dragonflies skimmed the water in lazy figure eights. His boat moved slowly alongside the edge of the reeds now, brushing close but never touching. The oars dipped in once or twice, not for speed, just to guide the drift. A soft push, a small correction, the kind a man makes when he knows the river will do most of the work if left alone. As he passed by, the reeds whispered, not loudly, not like the wind might stir trees in the dry season, but gently, rhythmically, a brushing, hushed kind of conversation. Amun imagined it might be the reeds murmuring among themselves, exchanging notes about the evening, the river level, the weight of the clouds. He leaned slightly forward, letting one hand trail in the water. It was warmer than it had been earlier, holding the day's heat in its depths. His fingers sliced through it slowly, leaving ribbons of ripples behind. Even this, just the sound of his fingers parting water, was enough to hold his attention. It was like tracing a story into the river's surface, one that would vanish as quickly as it was written. Birds rustled nearby, not alarmed, just adjusting. A few small plops told of frogs shifting on lily pads. The entire riverbank seemed to breathe with him. Inhale, the reeds lifted in the breeze. Exhale, they leaned gently together, brushing stems. Amun closed his eyes for a few moments. The way the water moved, the boat, the reeds, the sound of nothing and everything all at once. It made him forget about rowing, about distance, about arriving. There was only this. Now the boat entered one of the river's slow bends, a place where the water grew deeper and darker. It didn't change abruptly, it simply deepened, like a thought that had gone quiet. The sounds changed too. The chitter of insects faded. The reeds gave way to open water. The birds grew fewer, and the rhythm of the river slowed. Here, the current pulled more steadily, and Amun allowed it. He set the oars down once more, one on each side. Let them rest, let them dry a little in the breeze. The river would carry him through the bend, it always had. He leaned back slightly, letting his spine press against the edge of the plank seat. His eyes found the sky. The colors there had shifted, the golden tones had vanished. What remained was a soft gray, melting into a darkening blue. A single faint star had begun to blink above the trees to the west. Amun's mind began to drift, slowly, lazily, like the boat. He thought of nothing and everything. His thoughts moved like the river beneath him, not in straight lines but in gentle curves. One moment he remembered a time when his father rode these same waters, his strong arms moving just as slowly, just as deliberately. The next he recalled the sound of his mother grinding grain in the early morning, a rhythmic scrape of stone on stone. Then, nothing again. Just breath. And boat. And river. He did not fight the stillness, he allowed it to wrap around him like a woven shawl. There were no lanterns here, no firelight, only the dusk. And the water. And the rhythm of a boat moving without urgency. The trees along the shore began to blur, the sounds, fewer now, came in slow intervals. A creak, a splash, a whisper. Then stillness again. Time became strange, stretching and folding. The boat moved. The sky darkened. The river pulled. And Amun simply drifted, eyes half open, body at ease, thoughts curling like smoke into the night. The boat's motion was so gentle now that it barely registered. Amun sat very still, not out of discipline or purpose, but because the stillness felt correct, natural, as if moving would interrupt the quiet language that dusk had brought with it. At his feet rested a shallow woven basket, its sides smoothed and darkened by years of use, its weave imperfect in some places, tighter in others. It wasn't meant for carrying anything heavy, not for the markets, not for trade, no, this was his offering basket. Its only purpose was this time of day, and this stretch of river. Inside it were a few simple things, nothing grand, nothing ornate. Just what he'd gathered earlier in the day, chosen with care, and laid gently inside. A small handful of barley, still warm from the sun, a folded strip of dried papyrus, a tiny carved fish made of old driftwood, and a single dried fig, wrinkled and sweet. The items did not speak loudly, they didn't shine, but they each held meaning to Amun at least. Small tokens, small thoughts made physical. He bent forward slowly, lifting the basket with both hands. It was light, but he held it with reverence, as one would carry a sleeping child or a fragile coil of smoke. He brought it close to his chest. The wood of the boat creaked softly as he shifted his weight, but not in protest. It was a familiar sound. A soft exhale of old timber shaped long ago by human hands. He sat like that for a while, holding the basket, looking down into it, not praying, not speaking. Just observing, just breathing. The offering wasn't about words, it wasn't about asking, it was about placing. About letting go. One by one, he began to set each object on the surface of the river. First, the barley. He held it between 2 fingers, then let it fall, watching the grains scatter lightly, resting on the water like pale gold before they began to sink, slowly, lazily, into the folds of current. Then the dried papyrus rolled tightly into a little coil, no wider than his thumb. He placed it atop the water's skin. It bobbed once, twice, and began to drift, turning slowly as if looking for something. Then the fish, small, hand-carved, not even smoothed, its tail was crooked, its face uneven. But it was his. He had made it seasons ago. He kissed the top of its wooden head once before releasing it. It floated better than he remembered, paddling forward with the current like a real fish might, just for a moment, then tipping gently to one side, half submerged, then gliding on. And finally, the fig, dried, dark, with a small tear in its skin. He held it longer than the others, turned it in his hand, smelled its sweet dust. Then, with a breath, he let it go. It landed on the surface with a tiny sound, barely a splash, just a sigh. The basket was empty now, but Amun did not lower it. He held it a while longer, as if the weight it once carried still lingered. The water was nearly still in this part of the bend. A wide channel, bordered on both sides by tall, sleepy reeds and silt-soft banks that held no interest in speed or movement. This was a place for slowness, a place the river forgot how to rush. Amun watched the 4 offerings move away from the boat in different directions. None of them hurried. The barley had vanished already, swallowed into the silt beneath. The papyrus curled like a sleeping fish, half submerged. The wooden fish floated in a lazy spiral, turning with such gradual motion it looked suspended in time. The fig bobbed gently, its sweetness leaching into the water little by little. He didn't follow them with the boat, he let them drift on their own path, their own rhythm. This part of the river accepted such things. Over the years he had given many small items here. Some returned to shore, others disappeared entirely. Some tangled in reeds, some carried down river to places he'd never see. He never looked for them afterward. That wasn't the point. The point was the release. He sat back again, the empty basket resting beside him now. One oar moved gently, touched by the current, then tapped softly against the edge of the boat. The sound was rhythmic, soft, hollow, a kind of wooden heartbeat. Above him, the sky had turned the color of faded linen. No sharp stars yet, just the quiet thickening of twilight. The first true shade of night settling into the folds of dusk like cool air under a door. He reached out and touched the surface of the river with his fingertips just once. It felt cooler now. The heat of the day had retreated, tucked into the muddy banks. The water pressed against his fingers like silk, moving but not going anywhere quickly. A single bird called out, far off, then silence again. His body relaxed further, the lines in his forehead softened, his jaw loosened, the long muscles of his back stretched, then settled. He leaned slightly to one side, resting his elbow on the edge of the boat, letting the motion of the water lull his bones. He didn't think of where the offerings had gone. He didn't think of where he was going. He simply watched the sky grow dim, and listened to the breath of the water as it continued whispering beneath him. Night did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, slipping over the river like a length of dark linen, drawn gently across a resting body. Amun welcomed it. His eyes adjusted, shapes changed. The trees along the riverbank no longer had edges, just silhouettes, just the idea of trees blurred against a deepening sky. The boat, once clearly visible, had become a dark cradle, indistinct and still. He did not need light, not here, not now. His body remembered where everything was, the grooves in the wooden bench beneath him, the softness of the old cloth he sat on, the small knot on the right side of the oar handle where he always placed his thumb. He moved slowly, shifting just enough to rest his back more fully. The sounds were fewer now. Even the insects had quieted. Somewhere, deep in the trees, an owl stirred. But its wings made no sound. Just a faint absence of sound where motion passed through air. Amun's breath matched the river now, long, steady, without urgency. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep, not yet, but to listen better. Eyes could distract, but ears could hear everything the river said at night. The deep, round creak of the current, the faint trickle against a stone, the hum of silence between those sounds, more complete than any song. He imagined the fig still floating somewhere far behind him. He imagined the wooden fish had joined a school of real ones, gliding silently beneath moonlight. He imagined the papyrus had unrolled itself, wordlessly, like a message the river could read. All of it, gone now, or not, it didn't matter. He breathed again, slowly, felt his chest rise, then fall, then again, each breath deeper than the last. There was no wind. Just the warmth of air still holding onto the memory of sunlight. He let his arms rest at his sides, his hands opened, his mouth closed. The boat shifted just slightly, and Amun drifted with it, as the river pulled him into the quiet center of the night. The boat had become more than a vessel. It had become a part of the night itself, a floating cradle, dark and motionless, with every seam of timber gently exhaling the warmth it had collected through the day. The wood beneath Amun's body no longer felt like a thing built by human hands. It felt like something grown, something softened by time, shaped not by tools but by wind and water and waiting. He lay back, arms at his sides, the oars now still. No more dipping into the water, no more steering. The boat was at rest, guided only by the slow, round pulse of the river. That rhythm, too gentle to notice unless you surrendered to it, too slow to measure, unless you had no intention of measuring anything at all. The night was nearly complete now, not heavy or thick but soft, thin like cloth. It had wrapped itself over everything, every reed and stone and ripple. All sharpness gone, all color folded into shades of blue, then charcoal, then sleep. Amun shifted once, not to adjust anything, just to feel the boat respond. It did, with a gentle creak, an answering sigh, the way a hammock sighs beneath its weight. Above him, the sky was no longer blue at all. It was black, but a soft black, pierced only by one or two faint stars. They weren't sharp or blinking. They were sleepy too, breathing very slowly, flickering like tiny embers in a hearth left to cool. Amun's breathing matched them. In. Hold out. Stillness. The scent of night was subtle yet distinct, warmer near the water's surface, a little sweetness like fig bark and soft mud. A touch of old wood, the memory of smoke from someone else's distant fire, so faint he could not tell if it was real or imagined. His fingers rested on the edge of the boat, The wood was smooth there, polished by decades of hands just like his. Fathers, uncles, elders, each one who had rowed this boat, or one just like it. He felt them all in that grain, that line of softened edge. He let his fingertips remain, unmoving, just listening through the wood. Somewhere, far off, a bullfrog murmured once, then again, then stopped. And the night deepened. Amun wasn't sleeping yet, but he was no longer fully in the world of waking either. There was a softness to this space, a suspended state where thoughts did not form in sentences, where memories drifted without shape, where breath and water and time all moved with the same hush. He had been here before, not often, only when the night was particularly still, and the boat especially quiet. It was the kind of moment that required nothing of him. No paddling, no direction, no watching the shore for signs, just being. He lay still, eyes half-lidded, gaze turned upward, toward a sky so wide, it felt like it could carry him away. And below, the water answered with the same depth, as if the river mirrored the heavens, a dark ribbon holding stars, not above, but beneath. Sometimes he imagined he was floating between them, sky above, sky below, cradled not by wood and water, but by the quiet space between two eternities. That, here in the center, time had paused, breath had slowed, and thought had become something round and empty, like the moon behind a veil. The boat shifted slightly. A soft bump. He turned his head, barely moving his neck. It had caught on a shallow tangle of reeds, not enough to stop it, just enough to pause the drifting. A temporary anchor, given by the river itself. He did not push away, he let it be. He listened. A rustle in the reeds. A sigh of a small creature, unseen. A breeze, so faint, it moved only the tops of the papyrus fronds. Everything moved, and yet, nothing hurried. The stillness was not silence. It was full of motion, too gentle to see, sounds too soft to disturb anything awake. Amun closed his eyes again. His breath continued. His heartbeat, steady. The boat's cradle, unmoved. Thoughts began to emerge now, not urgent ones, not questions or plans. Just soft shapes, gentle recollections. The smell of his father's hands, strong and warm, the scent of river clay and carved wood, the sound of a rope tightening on a mooring post. A cooking pot bubbling beside a reed fire long gone cold. Not memories in full, just fragments, drifting. He let them pass, one by one. The reeds his mother used to tie into baskets, how she would hum while she worked. That low tune, tuneless really, made only to fill the air. The feel of sand underfoot, still warm at dusk. The old copper lantern that had belonged to his grandfather, long lost. But in the drifting of his mind, it still hung from a post, its glow flickering in the wind. A goat bleating faintly in the far distance. A friend's voice calling once, and never again. These were not thoughts that led anywhere, they had no direction, no edge, just the soft tug of feeling, with no need for words. Each one arrived, settled in him for a moment, then drifted off again, into the slow night. Amun's body was motionless now, his breath, shallow. The boat, still paused in the reeds, did not press him forward. The sky above, the sky below both waited. And so did he. Not for anything. Just with everything. Still in the soft pulse of night. The boat had not moved. Not truly. It had shifted, just slightly, turned perhaps by the most delicate of underwater currents, as if the Nile itself had changed its breath. But to Amun, lying still, it felt as though he'd entered a deeper part of the night, one where time stopped asking questions. The moon had risen now, not high, just above the horizon. A soft pale disk, as if someone had crushed chalk into a bowl of ink and left it to float. It stretched a long narrow path across the river, light made liquid. It shimmered, yet didn't glitter. The shimmer was lazy, gentle, broken only by the small uneven ripples of water that sighed beneath the boat's edges. A path, yes, but not one to walk. A path made only for remembering. And Amun did remember. Not in a grand way, not as though the night demanded it, but quietly, slowly, the way the moonlight revealed only 1 inch of riverbank at a time. He remembered the sound of his father's oar. It wasn't the sound of water alone, it was the sound of strength and rhythm and presence, a wooden oar pressing against something ancient. Not pushing away from the world but moving with it, surrendering to its slow demands. He had been small then, maybe 10, maybe 11, he couldn't remember which. His father hadn't spoken much as they rowed, just once, maybe, to point to the curve of a heron's wings, or to name the kind of fish that darted below the boat's wake. Amun had watched the oar more than anything. He remembered the way the moon caught its blade, the way the shadow of it sank beneath the surface like a whisper, then vanished into nothing, then returned again, in a pattern so reliable it seemed sacred. Dip, push, drift, pause. The pause always came, a heartbeat of stillness between strokes. His father had always known that part was important. It was in that pause that the boat listened. In that pause the river answered. And so Amun, now grown, mirrored it. Though his oars were resting, his thoughts followed the same pattern: dip, push, drift, pause, and drift again. The boat Amun used was not the same as his father's. His father's had been narrower, older, made of dark wood worn by many hands before his. A boat that had known the weight of fish and baskets and families, returning from long market days upriver. But Amun had always admired it. He used to run his fingers over the grain, even when not rowing, tracing the way the water had etched its signature into every beam. The texture was not smooth, but softened. It held memory. And tonight, lying back in his own boat, he let his hands wander again, this time on different wood but the same river. He found a knot in the timber near his right hip, pressed his thumb into it. The wood gave slightly, warm from the day. He imagined his father doing the same, sitting in his own boat, feeling for some anchor point, not to grip, but to remember. The moonlight spilled over the boat's edge now, tracing every raised grain like ink on a scroll. The edges of the planks glowed faintly. It reminded him of the oil his father would rub into the wood before each season's first row. A mixture of ash and fat, warmed by hand, spread evenly, slowly. A ritual. Not done for speed or gloss, but to show care. That ritual had never been spoken of. It simply was. One evening, long ago, Amun had watched as his father rubbed the wood with both palms, slowly, in circles, back and forth. The scent had been earthy, smoky, clean. A scent Amun could still recall now, even though the man who made it was long gone. He could almost see him now. Not clearly, but as a figure, a form sitting at the other end of the boat, his back slightly bent, his arms moving, as if drawing the night itself toward him with each row. Dip, push, drift, pause. The echo remained. Amun's gaze wandered along the water's surface, watching where the moonlight faded. There was no edge, no clear line, just a slow dissolving where the shimmer became murk, where silver gave way to black. That soft boundary fascinated him. Even as a child he had stared at it, trying to understand why it moved. Tonight, it moved too. With each faint ripple, with each tiny shift of the boat's belly on the water, the edge of the moonlight bent, twisted, stretched, then returned. It was like breath. His father's breath. He remembered the sound of it in the quiet hours of the night when they'd camp along the bank. A slow, deep breathing that sounded like the wind moving through tall grass. It had comforted him, more than any words. Now he tried to match it. Inhale, slow. Hold. Exhale, slower still. The path of moonlight reached toward the boat again, and for one soft moment the entire bow was aglow, pale wood, thin gleam, a strip of silver across the curved timber, as if someone had laid a ribbon upon it and then vanished. He imagined his father seeing it too. They had shared many silences, not awkward ones, just natural ones, a kind of wordlessness that belonged to people who spent their lives listening to water. Amun breathed again. The air was cool now. A low mist had begun to gather near the reeds, thin as gauze. The kind of mist that clings to surfaces, never rising high, never swirling, just resting, waiting, a boundary between sleep and waking. The oars were silent. The stars overhead had thickened, crowding together in sleepy clusters. And the moonlight still moved gently, slowly, tracing a path Amun no longer needed to follow. Because the memory had already brought him where he needed to be. With his father, with the river, with the night. And within that stillness he remained. Just breathing. Just remembering. Just drifting. The river was quiet now, quieter than it had been all evening. Even the breeze seemed to hush itself, as if it too understood something was near, something familiar, inevitable, but not yet to be acknowledged. The kind of quiet that settles when you're nearing the edge of a journey, when your body begins to recognize the shape of home, but your eyes still choose to wander elsewhere. Amun sat up slowly in the boat, not to row, not to peer ahead, but simply to change the pressure on his back. His spine had grown used to the slant of the planks. The ache it offered was no longer a complaint. It had become part of the rhythm. He shifted, adjusted the cloth at his lower back, and folded one leg beneath him. The other leg dangled gently over the boat's side, toes just grazing the cold, dark water. That slight touch made the world feel solid again. He knew where he was. Not because of any landmark, not because he could see his home, or the bend in the reeds that marked the inlet nearby. No, he knew because his body knew. Because the smell of the water had changed. It was subtle. Just a faint difference in the moisture of the air. A deeper sweetness, like rotting figs and warm clay. The kind of scent that clings low to the surface, brushing the nose only when you've grown quiet enough to let it in. He remembered that scent from childhood, too. Returning home after hours on the river, still far from shore, he would smell it first. And he'd sit up straighter, not because he saw the hut, or the fire pit, or the shape of his sister's sleeping mat, but because he could smell the land. And now, he did again. He did not smile, nor speak, nor even fully think. The knowing was enough. It pressed into the soles of his feet, rose into his chest, settled there like a bird in an old nest. But still he did not look. There would be time to turn the boat, Time to drift those last few meters toward the inlet. Time to listen for the dry pop of reeds parting, the soft scrape of the boat's hull against sand. But not yet. First he had to linger. Because the moment before home was its own kind of place, a strange, delicate shore, a place between. And Amun had always loved that place. He dipped his fingers into the water, letting them float there, just below the surface. The cold was not sharp, it was a memory now, a familiar chill, like a stone kept in a pocket too long, cool, but no longer biting. The water was darker here, not from depth, but from shadow. The reeds on either side of the river had thickened, not tightly packed, but enough to hold the moonlight back, enough to darken the path ahead. Amun could no longer see the shore on either side, but he didn't need to. The current had slowed, the river's song had softened. The frogs, so loud earlier, had grown still. Even the insects seemed to hum at a lower pitch. This was the edge. Not of the river, but of return. And under the boat, something moved. A long, slow shadow passed just beneath the hull. A fish, perhaps, or a drifting log, or a bend in the current shaped by stones. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was the feeling. The sensation of something moving unseen, unbothered, without rush. He watched the ripples spread outward, small V-shaped waves that barely disturbed the moon's reflection. The water stilled quickly again. And then, he heard it. The softest creak, wood against wood. The boat's timbers speaking to one another. A dialogue of age, of dampness and weight. A quiet complaint that carried no urgency. The sound of a boat settling into the water more deeply, as if ready to rest too. Amun leaned forward and ran his palm along the rim of the boat, the wood cool beneath his fingers. His fingertips brushed over a small chip in the edge, just a splintered place where the wood had cracked months ago. He had meant to fix it, had even placed a reed in it once, just to remember, but it never felt urgent. And now, the crack remained. He smiled softly, not with his lips but with something deeper, the kind of smile that lives behind the eyes. He dipped his hand back in the water, swirling it once, watching how it disturbed the moon. The reflection bent, folded, stretched, then settled. So did Amun. He leaned back again. The moment hadn't passed, not yet. The shore was close, but still hidden. And he would wait. There was a sound. Not from the water, not from the boat, but from the bank. A distant thump. Then a soft rustle, perhaps a goat lying down for the night. Or the wind catching the roof of a woven hut. Or the flap of a reed mat brushing a wooden post. Amun didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. His ears were long trained. Sounds near the inlet always came softened, filtered through layers of river scent and memory. He knew which were real and which were dreams. The sky was beginning to change, though barely. A touch of indigo stretched across the stars now, a bluer black. A quieter dark. The kind of color that comes before the first bird sings, before the world knows it's waking. But Amun, he would stay here a little longer. He shifted again on the bench, running his fingers along the underside of it. There were notches there, carved years ago. Markings he had once made absent-mindedly with a blade of dried palm. Tiny slashes. In rows. Maybe for counting. Maybe for nothing. His father had told him, long ago, that the river didn't like to be counted. Row to feel, not to measure, he'd said once. Amun nodded to himself. The river knew when it was being measured. It always resisted. The current would grow stubborn, the oars would grow heavy, the fish would disappear. But tonight, there was no need to measure. Only to float, to breathe, to wait. The boat turned gently, not by his hand, but by the waters. A slow pivot, nothing urgent. The bow now faced the direction of the inlet. It was time. Almost. He reached for the oar, not to row but to feel its weight in his palm. Smooth. Cool. Balanced. His hand wrapped around it, like it had 1,000 times before, and still, he didn't move it. The inlet was there, just beyond the reeds, just around the dark curve of the bank. But he waited. Because there is something sacred in the final moments before return. The stillness before the dock. The hush before the dog barks. The quiet before the house sighs at your footsteps. And Amun would honor that. Just a few more breaths. Then he would row. The boat moved almost on its own. Not fast, not even steadily, but with the rhythm of something that had done this hundreds of times before, thousands perhaps. The current nudged it, no more than a whisper, a faint gesture to the left, a slow lean. The bow began to drift inward, toward a gap in the reeds, so narrow it was nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar. But to Amun it was home's gate. Not marked by a pole or a rope or even a stone, simply known by feeling. He let the oar rest against his lap, unused. There was no need to guide, not now. The boat knew this stretch of water better than he did in a way. The oar had always been more ceremonial here, a symbol of arrival, not a tool of it. The reeds brushed along the sides of the boat as it entered the inlet. Dry stalks, some broken, some green. They leaned in, then slid away again, as if in quiet greeting. Not rustling, not cracking, just brushing softly, like the backs of gentle hands against his shoulders. Ahead, the wooden dock revealed itself slowly. It was modest, nothing more than 6 narrow planks nailed to 2 beams set into the muddy bank. It wobbled if stepped on too suddenly, it creaked with age and moisture, but it was still strong. Still waiting. He had helped his father build it many years ago. The nails were long gone, just wood pressed into wood now, held together by rope and the weight of habit. And in the evening, when the moon rose just right, it shone like silver against the dark water. Amun sat still. He watched it come closer. Not quickly. Not directly. The boat drifted past it first, then turned slightly, then glided back, a gentle arc. As if circling around an idea before fully arriving. The boat's edge tapped against the dock with a hollow knock. Amun breathed in. Then, out. Then again. And only after that did he move. He reached for the mooring rope. It lay coiled in the bottom of the boat, exactly where it had always been, coiled loosely, not tied. Its fibers were frayed now, softened by years of sun and wet hands. It no longer bit into the skin when pulled. It only rested there, warm and pliant. He bent forward slowly, knees crackling with the sound of old joints, and lifted the rope with both hands. Not rushed, not efficient, just deliberate. He always tied the boat the same way. Loop once, pull tight, wrap twice more, tuck the end beneath, not for security, but for repetition. For the comfort of repetition. He stood now. Feet planted firmly in the boat, which wobbled slightly beneath him. He shifted his weight. first to one leg, then the other. The boat stilled again. His hand reached for the dock post. It was smooth at the top where so many fingers had touched it before. His father's, his grandfather's. Even the village children, long grown now, had once gripped it for balance when pretending to be boatmen like him. He stepped up slowly. One foot onto the dock, the wood bent slightly beneath him, released a groan, then settled. Then the second foot. He stood now, fully out of the boat. Standing on the edge of his life. The night was quiet. The stars above shone freely, unobstructed by any roof or tree, just an open dome of sky, vast, still, familiar. He did not rush. He let the air touch his skin. Let it remind him that he was no longer on the river, let it fold around him like an old shawl, heavy with memory. He turned toward the house. It was still beyond the reeds, just a shadow now, but it waited, and the path to it had not changed. Stone, mud, then sand. Amun stood there, hand still on the post, and gave the river one final glance, not dramatic, not ceremonial, just slow. Then he stepped forward. His sandals met the earth with a soft crunch. This was not the sand of the riverbank, not yet. This was the packed earth of a well-walked path, hardened by generations of steps, a winding route worn down by habit, not marked by sign or marker but known. He walked slowly. Not because of fatigue, but because this stretch of ground deserved slowness. The reeds thinned as he moved forward. Small insects leapt aside. A frog blinked lazily near a puddle, then settled again. Above, the sky held its shape. The stars seemed neither brighter nor dimmer than earlier, but somehow softer, as if they, too, were preparing for sleep. His hut came into view now. A single structure, low-roofed, walls of woven reed and packed mud, a crooked door with no lock, just a leather flap to pull it closed. The fire pit beside it was long cooled. A scattering of ash marked where the flames had once lived. A few stones still circled it, keeping the shape alive. He passed a wooden stool. The one he always sat on after returning from the river, just for a few minutes. Just to listen. To nothing. To everything. Tonight would be no different. He lowered himself onto it slowly, letting his muscles fold, letting the weight of the day settle. His hands rested in his lap. His fingers still smelled faintly of rope, of river, of fish. He listened. Not to conversation, not to the call of a neighbor, but to silence. Deep, unbroken silence, the kind that spoke in layers. The hum of the ground, the pulse of air, the gentle creak of wood cooling from the sun. His eyes half closed. Not asleep. Not yet. Just resting. Letting the day slide off his shoulders. Letting the sound of the boat, the water, the oars, the fish, all of it fade. He would go inside soon. Lie on the mat, pull the cloth over his legs, close his eyes. But not yet. For now he would just sit. Still. On the dock's other side. The hut greeted him like a familiar breath. Its door, no more than a curtain of stiffened linen, swung gently as he lifted it with the back of his hand. It brushed his knuckles like dried leaves, curling slightly at the edges, worn smooth in the middle, where his palm had passed so many times. Inside, the air was cooler. Still. Almost unmoving. It had waited for him. Unhurried, undisturbed. Shadows stretched across the packed floor, not as shapes but as softness. Gentle layers of dusk folded into corners, hugging the contours of the walls, collecting near the low ceiling where the day's warmth still lingered. Amun stepped inside with care. His soles met the earth silently, no crunch, no shift. Just weight, his weight, pressing softly down into the home he had built with his own hands. The walls were made of reed and clay. Their scent was faint but deep, earthy, sweet, touched by age. He let the door fall closed behind him. The linen dropped with a sigh. The room held only what was necessary, nothing more. To the left, a wooden shelf with 3 flat bowls, one for dates, one for water, one empty. A clay jar beside them, its lid slightly askew, holding yesterday's bread. To the right, a small chest. He hadn't opened it in weeks. Perhaps longer. Inside were spare wraps, extra rope, a flint, and 2 small stones polished by the Nile. And directly ahead, his mat. It lay unrolled near the far wall, where the ground was smoothest, made of woven palm fiber, its edges curled slightly from use. At its head, a thin cloth folded twice, neatly, his pillow, not stuffed, not padded, just a softened rectangle of linen, faded in color and stitched long ago by a hand now gone. He stood before it for a moment, unmoving. Then, with slow fingers he reached down. He knelt carefully, one knee then the other, with a long exhale between them. The mat felt cool beneath his hands. He spread the blanket. It was a single piece of cotton, light and thin, dyed once in pale blue but now mostly gray, from many washings in the river. There was a small tear along one edge. He had meant to repair it, but hadn't. Somehow the tear had become a part of the blanket's story. It didn't need fixing, not yet. He smoothed it out. With one hand. Then the other. Then once more, even slower. His movements were almost ritualistic, not out of obligation, but out of peace. The way one might smooth the surface of water in a bowl, not to change it, but simply to feel the calm of it. He sat back on his heels, looked at the mat, then down at his own legs, still dusty from the river path, and decided, slowly, it was time to lie down. Amun shifted sideways. He placed his left hand flat on the mat, then his right, then lowered his weight carefully until he was stretched fully along the length of it. Shoulders sinking into the woven texture, hips easing into the ground's gentle firmness. His arms lay at his sides for a while. Then he folded them gently over his stomach, one hand resting on the other. His fingers didn't move. His chest rose, fell, rose again. The silence inside the hut deepened. It was not the kind of silence that feels like absence. It was the full kind, the kind that wraps around every object, the kind that hums quietly under each breath. It made the sound of his own body more noticeable, the soft scratch of linen beneath him, the faint beat of his heart in his chest, the rustle of a toe shifting beneath the blanket. He inhaled again. Long. Then let it go. Longer. His legs, once tight with motion, began to melt into stillness. His heels softened, his knees relaxed. His hips, once clenched against the effort of rowing, opened slightly. The ache in his lower back spread out and disappeared into the mat. His shoulders sank deeper. His neck uncurled, his jaw loosened. His body was a boat now moored. No more current, no more movement, just floating quietly. His mind, still tethered lightly to wakefulness, drifted through thoughts like slow water, nothing sharp, no worries, just shapes, soft memories, glimpses of the day. A bird he'd seen earlier, hopping between stones. The weight of the rope in his hands. The curve of the oar as it cut through water. The creak of wood beneath his feet. The sound of fish distant, like bubbles in a dream. These thoughts didn't come as sentences, just as images, one after another, then returning again and again. He turned his head slightly on the pillow toward the doorway. The curtain had settled into stillness. A single strand of moonlight had slipped through a gap near the edge and lay across the floor in a long line, almost like a thread, a path of silver drawn by the sky. He followed it with his eyes, then let them close. He did not fall asleep all at once. Not like a candle blown out. It was slower than that, like the dimming of a fire when the coals sink lower and the ash begins to cover them. Like a tide receding grain by grain, leaving behind only the glisten of wet sand. He stayed in the space between, eyes closed, body quiet, breath steady, but his mind only partly withdrawn. He imagined the river again, not as it was, but as it might be in a dream, wider, slower, unending. Its surface perfectly still, like a mirror made of night. And on that water, a single boat. His boat. Floating, with no oar, no current, just drifting gently through the stars. The stars moved above it, slow and pulsing, like breathing. He could hear the water in the distance now, not real water, but memory's water, the kind that laps gently at the edge of sleep, a sound that doesn't disturb, only rocks. And now, everything was slower. Thoughts took longer to arrive. They came in pieces, not in full. A fish. A bird. A rope knot. The hum of the oar resting. The smell of oil and wet wood. All drifting apart. Amun's body was still. Heavy but not burdened. Comforted. Like something long carried finally set down. His chest rose again and fell. And again. The sky outside began to shift, just slightly. The edge of morning leaned against the stars, gently, like a cheek against a shoulder. But Amun did not stir. He remained still, wrapped in his mat, beneath his blanket, beneath the roof he knew, inside the silence he trusted. The day would come. But not yet. Now was still night. Now was still quiet. Now was still rest. The sun had only just begun to warm the earth, and yet the Nile remained cloaked in a thin, gauzy mist that drifted lazily across its surface, like breath rising from the mouth of the river itself. The colors of morning were still hesitant, not yet bold, not yet bright. Just quiet shades of pale gold and hushed blue, gently brushing the world without fully committing to light. The breeze, if it could be called that, was little more than a slow exhale. Something felt more than seen. Something that stirred the hem of Amun's linen tunic and tickled the surface of the water with barely a ripple. Amun stood near the bank, his bare feet pressed softly into the cool, damp earth. He could feel the imprint of the ground slowly greeting the shape of his soles, a grounding sensation, steady and slow. The soil was still moist with night, its smell rich and old, like clay that remembered every footstep it had ever received. He looked out at the boat, his boat, resting half in water, half on land. It seemed to be sleeping still, its edges outlined with dew. A single oar leaned lazily against its side, and a small basket lay undisturbed near the bow, right where he'd left it the night before. He did not speak, nor think much. There was no need. His mind was not quite formed yet, still soft, still stretching out after sleep. Instead, he watched the way the mist curled around the reeds, drifting in slow loops and lazy spirals, as though the air itself had forgotten what it was doing. A heron, standing not far from him, blinked once, then again, then lowered its neck, slow as a falling ribbon. Its reflection doubled the movement, mirrored in water that barely moved. Amun took a step forward, then another. His fingers reached out to touch the rim of the boat, brushing away a few small beads of dew. He moved without hurry. There was no reason to rush. Morning was still deciding whether to arrive at all. The light touched things softly, his donkey's coarse mane, the uneven weave of a palm leaf mat, the damp wrinkles of a folded cloth left near the bench. Everything held stillness, like the world was holding its breath, not out of tension, but from contentment. There was peace in the pause. The mist had a sound to it somehow, not a voice exactly, but a hush, a presence. It settled into Amun's ears and softened every sound. The distant chirp of a morning bird, the creak of wood adjusting with the air, the slow lap of water against the curved hull of the boat. Even his own thoughts felt cushioned, padded in quiet. He moved around the boat slowly, placing a folded cloth near the stern, adjusting a small coil of rope, lifting an amphora and setting it down again, just to hear the solid weight of it meet the planks. These were small acts, almost without purpose, yet they were part of the morning, part of how the day formed itself. Each sound and movement became a note in the slow rhythm of waking. Amun turned his eyes skyward. The clouds were stretched thin, like threads pulled across a loom. Somewhere, the sun sat behind them, not yet shining strong, but suggesting its presence with a pale wash of light. Time didn't pass here, it dissolved. Minutes, moments, they blended into one long breath. Unmeasured, unhurried. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 50, but Amun stood still, then shifted slightly, then stilled again, letting morning wrap around him like a blanket still warm from sleep. The boat creaked softly once more, and somewhere out on the far side of the water, a frog croaked once, then was silent again. Nothing asked for attention. Nothing demanded effort. Even the river seemed unsure whether to flow or rest, and in that uncertainty, there was a quiet, perfect peace. The day had officially begun, but only just. Amun's breath moved steadily now, slower than usual, not from tiredness, but from ease. The kind of breathing that comes when the body forgets urgency, when every muscle, every bone, every small thought, is suspended in stillness. The boatman remained beside the river's edge, not yet stepping inside the vessel, but performing the slow, familiar rituals of readiness. His mind, soft like the early mist, drifted through the motions. He picked up the coiled rope with both hands. It was coarse against his palms, stiff from age and use. The kind of rope that had known many knots, many mornings, many quiet loadings. Amun unraveled it slowly, feeling the fibers resist, then yield. The sound of it, fibers brushing, twisting, was faint, but present, like the whisper of reeds in wind. He looped one end through a small ring at the front of the boat, tied it loosely, not to secure it, but simply to begin. There was no need for haste. The Nile, like him, was still yawning. Beside the prow sat a small clay pot, its surface rough, its mouth chipped. Amun lifted it gently, tilting it to look inside. Just water. Stale from the night before, but still useful. He poured a little over his hands, watching the trickle run slowly down his fingers, collecting at his wrists before soaking into the ground. The coolness reminded him that the day would warm soon. But for now, it was quiet and kind. With careful fingers he wiped the moisture from his palms using the edge of his tunic, then turned his attention to the planks of the boat. A few leaves had fallen into the corners. He reached to pluck each one out, pausing after each movement. They were small, curled things, brown at the edges, soft from damp. He dropped them gently onto the ground, letting them rest where the wind would decide their next home. A soft creaking came from underfoot as he stepped closer to the center of the boat. His weight was familiar to the vessel, as though it knew him, recognized the rhythm of his presence. The boards didn't resist, they adjusted, leaned into him. Amun placed a palm on the nearest bench, pressing down just enough to feel the wood beneath linen. The texture was uneven in places, polished smooth in others by countless sit-downs, countless journeys. His fingers moved slowly across the grain, reading the language of age and memory. Next came the amphora. Not the large one, but the small clay jug used for short trips, one with a handle worn down by time. He lifted it with both hands, testing its weight, still half full. He held it to his ear, listened to the faintest slosh inside, then nodded to himself, satisfied. It was enough. He moved slowly around the inside of the boat, touching everything he might need. A wrapped cloth folded tightly, a wooden paddle resting along the bench, a strip of dried palm fronds twisted into twine. Each item felt exactly where it belonged. Nothing had to be moved. But still, Amun touched each one, as if greeting them after sleep. Behind him, the reeds swayed with a soft brushing sound. The donkey, still tethered to a nearby tree, let out a low breath, then returned to its chewing. Far in the distance, a faint knocking echoed from another boatman's paddle, invisible behind the curtain of mist, but familiar all the same. The world was waking in pieces. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully, respectfully. Amun settled into the center of the boat, placing his feet flat, his hands on his knees. He did not row yet. He just sat. The Nile, glass-like now, reflected the slow bloom of morning above. Wisps of mist still moved across its surface, breaking apart where warmth touched them. And still he waited, letting the day breathe around him, letting the quiet stretch a little longer, letting the stillness stay. Amun remained seated, not in stillness now, but in preparation. The kind of quiet that comes before the beginning of emotion, like a breath taken in and gently held. His hands moved slowly toward the oar. It rested beside him, lightly curved, smoothed by years of gripping, stained by river water and time. The wood was warm where the sun had begun to touch it, cool where the shadows lingered. He ran a thumb along its edge. The grain rose and fell like tiny ripples, a memory of the tree it once was. He lifted it slowly, carefully, with the reverence of ritual, not heavy, but solid, familiar. His body adjusted instinctively, knees shifting, spine straightening. He turned his torso just slightly, letting the oar settle into its groove along the side of the boat. The motion made the smallest creak wood against wood, then silence again. Amun took one final glance across the water. The mist was thinning now, lifting in slow, invisible threads, revealing more of the riverbank, the reeds, the sky. But still, it felt quiet. It felt like he and the Nile were the only two awake, the only two that mattered. He inhaled deeply. The air smelled of damp papyrus, warm clay, a trace of wet bark from the acacia trees nearby. A breeze touched his face, barely enough to move his tunic. And with that, he began. The first pull of the oar was slow, heavier than it would be later, as though the water hadn't fully let go of sleep. Amun didn't force it. He leaned gently into the motion, letting the blade dip into the current, letting it find its own pace. The water parted around it with a soft glug, a rolling swirl, then a hush. The boat rocked, just slightly, not startled, not imbalanced, just responding, as if stretching its limbs for the first time today. Amun pulled again, then again, each stroke steady, even without rush. The boat eased forward, breaking a path through the delicate mirror of the Nile's surface. The ripples unfurled outward from the hull, expanding in soft, slow rings, then vanishing behind him. He adjusted his posture, more from habit than need. His feet pressed lightly against the wooden brace, his arms moving in a rhythm not decided by him, but shaped by countless mornings exactly like this one. Stroke, lift, drift. Stroke, lift, drift. He began to hum, a low tone, not a tune exactly, but a kind of vibration that settled in his chest and buzzed through the oar. The kind of hum that kept time, not with a beat, but with breath. His father used to hum like this, and his grandfather before that, and now the river carried it forward. The breeze returned, lifting the hem of his tunic and fluttering it like a flag. Somewhere far upstream a bird called out once, then again, then fell silent. Amun's eyes remained half closed. He didn't need to look to know where he was. The bend in the river, the cluster of trees that grew thicker just ahead, the sandbar that always appeared during the dry season. All of it lived in his memory, layered over years, laid out like a quiet map. The strokes continued, even, patient, uninterrupted. The sun began to rise higher now, painting streaks of gold across the water. Amun felt the warmth brush his shoulders, then his neck, then the back of his hands. He smiled, not wide, not bright, but soft, like the river's own hush. This was not work, not really. It was something older than work, something slower, something shaped by tide and time. And the river carried on. The rhythm had taken over now, not because Amun willed it, but because the Nile had. Each stroke of the oar came not as a choice, but as a continuation, of a morning, of a lifetime, of a lineage that rode before language mattered more than water. The sun rose a little higher, the light no longer brushed but rested, softly, yet with a slow insistence. It warmed the crown of Amun's head, spilled over his shoulders, and laid itself across his back. Still, he did not hurry. The heat was not a command, only a quiet companion. A dragonfly skated near the bow. Its wings shimmered, translucent, like the thin layer of mist still rising off the water's surface. It hovered, shifted, hovered again, then darted away with a flicker, disappearing into the reeds without a sound. Amun's gaze followed it for a moment, then returned to the place where water met horizon. His thoughts, slow as the river itself, began to drift. They did not wander far, they never did. They moved through memories like his oar through water, careful, steady, and never too deep. He thought about the sack of grain that rested at his feet, tied shut with a frayed rope. It would reach the village downstream by mid-morning, just like it always did. The villagers would lift it from his boat without thanks or fuss, but they'd know it came from Amun. From this boat. From the quiet man who rode without delay, without error, without need of recognition. He thought too about his sandals, worn soft along the soles, frayed along the sides. They lay near the front of the boat, untouched since he'd stepped aboard. He never rode with them on. Not once. Not even in colder months. The bare soles of his feet needed to feel the texture of the planks. It was how he knew the boat's mood. How he sensed if a board had swollen in the night, or if a thin coating of river silt had gathered where it shouldn't. A bird called in the distance. Not a sharp cry but a mellow cooing sound, as if it too were still waking. Amun's hands shifted slightly on the oar, not to change the rhythm but to let the fingers stretch, curl, stretch again. His mind moved next to his breakfast. The wrapped bundle of flatbread, softened with river water, and a few olives tucked inside a cloth. It sat beneath a plank, near the midsection of the boat. He wouldn't eat it yet, not until the second bend. Not until he passed the acacia grove and the leaning palm that marked halfway. That was the rhythm too. Eat too soon, and the day would feel stretched. Eat too late, and the energy would dip. So he waited. His breath came slow now, not from effort but from pacing. A breath in held a moment, then released. The same way the boat moved forward, drawn in, held, released. Amun glanced toward the shore. There a patch of papyrus rustled. Nothing urgent, just the wind, or perhaps a fox, or a bird brushing against the stalks. The moment passed, the leaves stilled. His thoughts turned again to the oar. How many mornings had he begun like this? He didn't know the number, he didn't need to. Each day was not a separate tally, but a continuation. One long movement. One long drifting. The river did not count its waves. Why should he? He felt the shift of his muscles, deep in his shoulders, soft along his back. Not pain, not strain. Just the familiar sensation of use, of the body remembering its purpose. And still the river moved. Not quickly, never quickly. But always forward. By now the light had changed again. Not dramatically but gently, almost imperceptibly. The pale gold of early morning had ripened into something softer, less like dawn, more like day. Though the quiet had not lifted, the hush of the river still held. As if the air itself were reluctant to speak too loudly. Amun's arms moved in the same slow rhythm, draw, pull, lift, return. He no longer thought about the motion. His body remembered for him. Even his breath obeyed the cadence. A quiet inhale, pause, then a full, steady exhale through the nose. He barely noticed he was doing it. Just as he barely noticed the slight creak of the oarlock, or the sigh of the boat's hull shifting against the water. These sounds were not noise, they were company. The acacia grove came into view. Its shadow stretched out along the far bank, long and thin like fingers at rest. The leaning palm stood just beyond it. Amun glanced at it, not with any urgency, but with a soft nod of familiarity. The halfway point. The place where he always paused. Not because he had to, but because it had become part of the routine. The river, the bend, the tree, the break. He let the oar rest across his lap, its wooden shaft warm beneath his hands. He leaned back slightly, shoulders rolling open, head tilting just a little to one side. Not a full rest, just a settling. The way a bird might pause on a branch before taking off again. Beneath the mid-plank he reached for his wrapped bundle. The cloth, once vibrant blue, had faded from many sunrises. He untied it with fingers that did not rush. Inside, the flatbread lay warm from the morning heat, the olives, wrinkled but full of oil. He ate slowly, chewing until the last bit softened on his tongue. No sound, no haste, just the gentle motion of eating, the quiet satisfaction of enough. When the food was gone, he folded the cloth again. Not tightly, not with ceremony. Just folded, one side over the other, like the closing of a calm thought. He slid it back beneath the plank. And still the river flowed. Not that it hurried. It never did. but it always went forward. Amun turned his gaze across the water. In the far distance, white egrets dotted the shoreline, nearly invisible against the pale glare. They stood so still they might have been carved from mist. The light rippled across the water's surface now, not like a mirror, but like a moving veil, one that shimmered but never revealed. He picked up the oar again, fingers closing around the wood like they always had. No thought, just familiarity. He resumed the motion. Pull, lift, dip, draw. The water accepted the blade without resistance. The boat glided forward again, its nose slicing a near-invisible line through the river's skin. Amun did not rush. There was no need. The village was still a stretch away, but it would come. As it always did. As it always would. The sound of chickens, the smoke of fires, the quiet nods from men carrying jars or bundles or silence. But for now, it was just him, the boat, and the water. The Nile held him, carried him, guided him forward, not like a force, but like a memory. And as the breeze moved over the surface, and the reeds shifted again in the distance, Amun rode on. Not hurried, not waiting. Just rowing, just continuing, just being, on the river that never stopped. Even when the man grew tired, the water would carry on. And now, the Nile is quiet again. Amun has folded into the hush of night, just as you have. The gentle current continues, but there's nothing more to do. No more thoughts to follow, no more scenes to watch. Only stillness. A soft, endless hush that carries you into sleep. If you're still here, listening at the edge of dreams, we'd love for you to stay with us. So if this journey helped you drift away, even just a little, please give the video a gentle like, and press subscribe. There are more boring tales waiting for you. Different places, different moments. But always, the same quiet ending. From Boring Tales, good night.